Neil, welcome to the GSB.
Thank you for having me here.
Really excited to have you here today as our first guest for Global Speaker Series. So Neil, you grew up in China, and in 1989, you came to the US, initially for a PhD program in math, and you made the decision to do an MBA a year after that. And you chose to go into banking straight after your MBA. So I'm going to take us to the year 1999. At this point, you've been in banking for 8 years. You're running China capital markets for Deutsche Bank, and you're doing really well in your career. But at this point, you choose to make two pretty big decisions. One, you leave banking to start your own business, and two, you decided to move back to China. Tell us more about your thoughts behind that decision.
I think I can talk a little bit sort of the thoughts prior to my decision to go back to China start C-trip. Obviously, upon graduation from Jiao Tong, probably the best choice for me at the time is, go to US and study. But while I was in New York, I always thinking, can I do something? Can I leverage my China experience or background? 1994, there is an opportunity that you can go back to China and be part of the so-called capital markets efforts, right? Many students end up joining those Asian branch of, a big investment bank, and I'm part of them. And you get very excited because when you go back, you see how much China has been changed from the 1980s, against the time when I left China. 1994, 95, most of the so-called economic reform are around big enterprises, especially SOEs. What really actually have changed is toward the end of 1990, the 1990s, when private enterprises come to become one of the major force in the whole economic development. And then you're starting to find that there are opportunity to do financings for private companies. And because of that, you're thinking about whether you can be part of them. At that time, entrepreneurship was not a popular word. Okay? And people like myself would say, probably I don't have much opportunity, to do that because you need a lot of, very large amount of capital. But for people like myself who has not, do not have a lot of capital, there's not much, I can do until internet come to play. I have to thank, US for giving me the inspiration. I came to Silicon Valley very often because I have a lot of classmates while working in different tech firms here. From 1998 all the way to 2000, each time when I came, I noticed the big changes because many of those who work at Oracle, SAP, IBM, before has switched to internet jobs. You see the big billboard change from advertisement from big companies to internet companies. So you see the internet is really changing how people live and work here in US. And naturally, you will think, well, if this is going to be the case in US, it should happen in China. Expedia could change the travel industry so much in US, why not in China? So that's how I started, C-trip in 1999. Frankly, it's a very difficult decision. If I'm a, software, engineer, it's probably a natural extension of my previous professions. But I was a banker, right? A banker provides advice to the corporates on merger acquisitions, debt financings, IPOs, and I changed my role completely to something very, very new to me, right? And it was a very big venture for me. And the only thing I'm comfortable is that I know if I'm not successful, I can always go back. Because if Deutsche Bank do not hire me, there's someone else going to hire me. Look back is actually not very good, mentality, because when you do entrepreneurship, you better be so determined that you will make it successful, not just to hoping that one day you're going to go back. You should not leave yourself any other possibilities. When I really get involved with a startup, you don't have time to think about anything because you want to survive and you want to do well. And every day you are just so heavily engaged with your, surviving efforts. Indeed, I would say in the first 2 years, you try to find your business model, and you work day and night. You don't have time even to think about where's my other alternatives. You don't. Yeah. When I resigned from Deutsche Bank, my boss, the head of Asia capital market, said, "Neil, you should stay 4 more months." I said, "Why 4 more months?" Because euro is just created around that time, and the euro was introduced as a major currency. I was a fixed income banker, and I have been covered Ministry of Finance of China for many years, and Ministry of Finance has a plan to go to Europe to actually launch its first Eurobond. So my boss told me, "Look, you have been covered accounts for so many years. Just wait for 4 months." And I checked with my partners, and they said, "Neil, you can't wait for 4 months. Entrepreneurship is about speed. Another 4 months, you don't know what's going to happen." So I decided to quit in November, December, instead of wait until the spring in 2000. Interestingly, I never regret that decision, because that Eurobond was not launched until year 2003. So if you like to do something, and if you really feel like there's something calling you inside, you better do it right away. And that's all about entrepreneurship.
In 2002, you founded Home Inns, now one of the largest hotel chains in China. You're in more than 300 cities, close to 3,000 hotel chains, and also 4 years listed on NASDAQ. How do you do it? What do you think has contributed to your success as an entrepreneur?
I think it's very importantly that once you get into the business, you are able to really understand that sector very well. So at a C-Trip, it's really a very eye-open opportunity for me, for the whole hospitality industry. Is very, very underdeveloped. For example, there's many so-called business hotel or economy hotel chains in the U.S. But in China, back in 2002 and 2003, there's almost none. And when we launched Home Inns, initially I was a little bit concerned how big a company could be. But again, I got inspiration from U.S. I remember I was in Dallas visiting a few travel service company, because that was the hub of many U.S. Travel service companies. And I arrived at the airport. I rented a car, drive from the airport all the way to downtown. It was like nighttime, around 9 p.m., whatever. And during that 20 to 30 minutes drive, I observed there's about 15 names, different names of budget hotels or economy hotel chain, from Red Roof all the way to Motel 6, whatever. And the total number of hotels I counted around 25. So from Dallas, from suburban airport to the city, you can have 25 hotels. So I say, well, market size is not a problem for China now.
In 2005, you make yet another big decision, going from being an entrepreneur to becoming the entrepreneur behind entrepreneurs. And what's really interesting is you could have chosen to start your own fund, which I'm sure you had plenty of resources to do. But instead, you decided to be a franchise firm with Sequoia Capital, this really well-established American brand. What were some of these considerations behind bringing this global brand to China?
You can set up, a fund myself, but I think it's going to grow probably not as fast compared with setting up something with Sequoia. And also, I feel like I really want to learn from what a firm like Sequoia has been accumulated in the last 40 years. In Silicon Valley, there's many firms has been active in the investment space, but Sequoia has been obviously they are the longest and still probably the best, or if not or I would say at least one of the best. So I was very intrigued how they can do that, one generation after another. To me, to raise money to make investment is probably not the most difficult thing, but the most sort of challenging thing is how to make a sustainable business. To me, I think Sequoia China is just another venture. If you want to make one or two good investment, that's an easy job. but how you can build a team and how to make a sustainable business, just like what I did at C-Trip, I think that's a very, very different thing. And today look back, after 10 years, I'm very happy, the choice I made. Because, at our 10-year anniversary, we have a long list of entrepreneurs which become Sequoia portfolio CEOs. But more importantly, from 10 years ago, a 3-person, 4-person team, today we have 12 partners. And we have covered some of the most important sectors in China and become investor in many of the leading companies. And that's something which probably difficult to achieve just with one man's efforts or with Nielsen brand.
Sequoia Capital in China for the last 10 years has a phenomenal track record. You've pretty much put money in all of China's biggest unicorns, Alibaba, JD.com, VIP Shop. People call you China's Midas. You turn stone into gold. What do you think makes you so successful as an investor, especially in China? What's your secret sauce?
Well, I think this venture capital investment is a profession always has regret. Clearly, we have a lot of very successful companies, but obviously we also have a lot of regret, and frankly mistakes. And the good thing is you learn from your mistakes, and then you try to improve every year. The other thing very, very important is when you look at the Sequoia, U.S., they have 40-year history. They have a long list of success: Oracle, Cisco, Apple, and then Google. And one of the reasons behind that is they're able to capture all the major trends. And that's, I think, is the probably most important factors behind the success of firms like Sequoia. And same for us in China. If there's any so-called success for us, we have been really taking the major trend right. I remember back 7 years ago, we have decided that we should spend enough time and put enough of our investment into e-commerce area. We do have a view that e-commerce will become very, very important in China. So we invest probably around 15 e-commerce companies in China. Some of those are not successful, but we did capture the top 5 to 6 very successful e-commerce in China. Same for O2O. Offline to online is not a big space in the US, but it was a big space, and it continued to be a very important space for China. We think this is a very important area for us, and we did a lot of research back 4 or 5 years ago. We invest probably around, again, 12 to 15 companies, and we happen to capture the very top 4 companies, from Meituan to Dianping to Ele.me to Dada. And that's the way I think, I think probably, good firms should make investment. You actually have a view on the market, and hopefully a little bit earlier than, most other people, and you put big emphasis on the sectors and making multiple investment in that, in that sectors. And this is the same for, US. If you look at Sequoia, back in 40 years ago, they pay big attention to semiconductors. And then semiconductor leads to personal computer. And they again invest multiple companies in personal computer, and then to software companies. And then when internet become the major scene, they invest multiple internet companies, and then go into mobile internet. That is the way I think a good investor should follow, because of judgment on person, or judgment on a particular business model. But that's okay. You always will make mistake, but as long as you capture all the major trends, you'll be doing very, very fine.
So what do you think are some of these major trends going forward? What excites you about China today?
Every couple of years, there's always some technology breakthroughs. And the last 5 years in the US, the big theme is big data, SaaS enterprises. And it's not a big thing in China yet, but I think it's becoming increasingly important. In fact, I would think the returnees from this part of the world, especially from Silicon Valley, might have a better role to play in China if you talk about big data and SaaS and enterprises. China, in this time, is like US 5, 6 years ago. Just like when 1999, there's many big internet company U.S. being founded. China, there's very few area has been covered, and this is very much comparable. And when you come down to for the returnees to go back to a founding company, I think this is actually a very good area, because if you talk about consumer internet, you may not able to compete successfully against so-called the local guy, because in the consumer internet space, the cultural factor is so heavy. You have to understand your user very well. If you work in the U.S. for too long, you may not be able to do that. If you look at like Charles Zhang, and if you look at Robin Li, when they go back to China, they don't really have a very long working experience here in the U.S. They are not like an early employee of Yahoo or early employee of Google to go back to founding Chinese companies. But in the enterprises area, the technology component is more important. So people who work here for many years in that space could actually play a very important role in shaping up the space in China. So I think this is definitely a very important area. The other important area is so-called robotics or artificial and AI areas. Again, in that area, there are many U.S. companies ahead of China, but China started to see some local born companies which had developing its own technology. Company like DJI, right? Definitely the number one player in the drone space. And so I think we probably see some interesting dynamics. Even some of the Chinese company will doing better than some of the U.S. company addressing those major trends. Relatively speaking, I think China's opportunity might be bigger compared with the U.S.
And Sequoia China has actually also been working with a lot of these American companies. You've invested in LinkedIn. You're a strategic partner with Airbnb. So for you, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities and especially challenges for American companies entering China? And what's Sequoia's role in helping them navigate this?
If you're looking at global companies, especially U.S. company coming to China, I think in the first 30 years, 40 years, when China opened door, many U.S. companies has been very successful because the technology is just so advanced that when they come to China, there's no competitions. Like when GM come to China, people love it. So at that time, the key word in the joint venture is use technology to gain market share. So whether it's European players or American players, oftentimes set up their own subsidiaries or set up a joint venture in China, and they could do very well against the competition. But things have been really changed. Many sectors today, the private companies in China and state-owned enterprises in China are very competitive. They have learned, they have developed in their own R&D, and they can really compete very effectively with you, right? When P&G goes to China, when GM goes to China back 30 years ago, they dominate certain space. Today, they have to compete fiercely with many local players. So one of the idea here is that if a U.S. company comes to China, just copy what they have been done in U.S., it may not be that effective anymore. So you have to change your model and your product to cater to China's model, very unique business environment, especially in the internet space, because for internet, China and U.S. start around the same time. For some business model, China even advanced compared with U.S. For example, Tencent, today clearly much better than some of those social network companies in China. You can't say Tencent is learn from Facebook or copycat Facebook. In fact, if you look at Facebook and many others, some of those features are learned from Chinese companies. So if an internet company in US want to go to China, they have to think about whether they have an edge there or not. Secondly, they're going to have to face the competition from local companies, many driven by very, very strong entrepreneurs. So how are you going to be successful? One thing which we suggest is to having a very unique shareholding structures. You should introduce someone as entrepreneur as in your home country. Someone not listen to the head office, but someone able to base his product and service around Chinese unique business environment and leverage the edge from head office. That's probably the best way for a U.S. company to compete and do well in China.
Many of us here aspire to be entrepreneurs and see China as a great market opportunity. But what are some of the unique challenges that entrepreneurs face in China, and how do you recommend we overcome them?
I think one of the most frequently sort of encountered challenge is competition. It's actually interesting. I always very puzzled, and I still do not have the perfect answer. Here in the U.S., in Silicon Valley, have one business model. Typically, no one either cares to copy. You have Uber, you have Airbnb, you have LinkedIn. There's very few copycats. In China, as long as your business is doing well, you will definitely have copycats. It's a matter of how to compete more successfully, and that actually gonna putting pressure on the leaders to innovate all the time, right? I remember when I was running C-Trip, one of the my routine job is come to Monday meeting and discuss how our competitor was doing, especially Elon, right? So one of the Monday discussion item is, spending 30 minutes and discuss what's Elon has been launched in the last 1 week. And indeed, I have to say, many of those are copied what C-Trip been doing. Some of those very detailed, like marketing plans, like sending cards at the airport. When we do that, they did that. So what can you do, right? So you just have to innovate all the time just to make sure you stay ahead of the game. And it's a reality, and people have to face. You just have to, raise more money. You just have to, innovate all the time, and you just have to differentiate yourself well enough. And that differentiation sometimes comes down to very details. When we look at C-Trip versus Elon, at that time, we are around 2 times bigger than Elon. And one of the differentiate we have is through call center, we're providing better services. That's actually become a big edge. And if you're coming down to merchant relationship, when we establish a certain relationship with a hotel group, they follow. It's difficult to do exclusive deals, but only thing which we have been done well and differentiate yourself is a better customer services. And you can call that actually a small details, but that small detail really bring very big change. Bring very big gap for C-Trip against Elon. And so for China, if you want to get into those competitive space, you have to be prepared and to innovate all the times.
Can you maybe walk through us, share some insights on how you would actually have a quantifiable metrics within those big data sectors to determine which one would be potentially successful?
I think there's a few common checking point we will look at when we're looking at any startup. This is the same whether it's consumer internet or whether it's SaaS enterprise. One is obviously the background of the team, whether it actually fit for that type of entrepreneurship. For example, if it's e-commerce, I'll be very eager to know whether he has consumer retail experience, whether he has supply chain experience. But for SaaS enterprises, I will look to see if he has the relevant software experience or enterprises experience before. Secondly, I will also look at the market size. That's actually very, very important. If you look at e-commerce area, the reason why JD become one of the top internet companies in China, because they address the most important area at the very beginning, the 3C, the consumer the consumer electronics. If you start from something else, for example, you focus on books day one, then you may not get as big as you grow. So the total addressable market is always something very important, especially in the first 1 to 2 years. You can always expand from your core areas after you become successful. So in the SaaS enterprise area, you have to start from some verticals. And the question is whether that vertical is big enough for you to become a very substantial leader, and you can expand from that. Beyond these 2 points, the other very important, I think, area to look after is whether the time is right. Because enterprises' demand in China is clearly there, but people have priorities. For particular corporates, they'll look at it, how much money I want to spend on enterprise software, and what are the key sort of area I want to put money this year against a year later or 2 years later. So for enterprise software, you should look at those areas which corporate are having the most pain in increasing efficiency. We look at securities, we look at storage, we look at performance areas, we look at HR areas, some of those areas which clearly, with the rising labor cost, you have to address in those issues.
So my question is about people. When you was about to start Ctrip, how did you find your partners? What's the most effective way to find the perfect partners? Thank you.
It's difficult to find perfect partners, but as long as you find good partners, that's okay. When I look at many startups, when they walked into our conference room to present, to be honest, most of the team at the so-called angel stage or series stage do not have a complete team. But you need to have some core team member and addressing the major needs. In the Ctrip days, we have myself and James and Chichi. Right? We got 3 guys already have a lot of experience in different business segments. But even with that 3 people, we decided to find Fanming, who has worked at the travel industry for many years. Because we do realize online travel is about internet, but at the same time, it's about travel. So we want someone who understands the travel industry a lot, about how to build a relationship with hotels, how to position ourselves against all the other traditional travel agencies. So these are very interesting questions that you have to address, and you find someone who can complement your skill set and to addressing those issues. And if you're going to have a so-called core team at first, not a complete team, then try to find what are the most critical component of your startup, like e-commerce. Then you have to better have someone who understands supply chain. If you do not have someone experienced in that segment, you don't even have the business taking off. But maybe someone who do a better job doing online marketing comes second. It's still very important, but it's not the most critical at the day one. So I think you just have to go along with your business ramp up to find a team gradually. Day one to find a complete team is always a challenge.
So as a really successful entrepreneur yourself, and now being the entrepreneur behind entrepreneurs, what advice would you have for aspiring entrepreneurs here in the audience as they look to build something new?
I think you have to go with your heart. It's difficult to make a perfect choice. One, whether this go with the big trend. Secondly, probably more important, which is something you really like to do. When I was working at the Deutsche Bank, I really was excited by the internet development in China. I really want to do something. Ctrip itself fits me well because I love travel. At the same time, I think internet can change people's life in China. So you have to really love what you do. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to sustain. No matter what other people's interest, you should find your interest and follow your heart and find the stuff you are passionate about it and do it.